Hey everyone, welcome to the EarthRise podcast. This is Derek Barris. A couple quick notes before we begin today's episode. This Friday, I will be interviewing Jeff Sharlet, who is the author of The Family, a wonderful and insightful book about the intersection of politics and religion in Washington, D.C. That was more recently a Netflix miniseries that I highly recommend. We're going to be talking about his recent Vanity Fair article called He's the Chosen One to Run America, Inside the Cult of Trump, His Rallies Are Church, and He is the Gospel. It is quite an article. I highly recommend you check it out, and we'll be discussing a bit of that. We'll also be talking for my new podcast called Conspirituality, which I co-host with Matthew Remski and Julian Walker. You might have listened to them a couple of episodes. I had them on for 2 episodes here, and we decided to take that concept of investigating the intersection between the left-wing utopian wellness influencers and the right-wing conspiracy theorists that is rather problematic. And so we spend a lot of time working on that, conspirituality.net, or you can find it at your favorite podcast provider. And finally, to stay up to date with everything that I'm working on, check out derekbarris.substack.com. That is the newest home of my newsletter, which I send out once or twice a month. But I also offer a weekly newsletter at a paid subscription level of $7 per month that gets much more in detail and features original writing and reporting on mental health issues in a lot of different capacities. People who subscribe there will also get access to my Zoom workshops on that I hold regularly for yoga classes. I have, of course, my YouTube classes, and then I hold special workshops once a month. So subscribers get access to that as well. Just a lot of different projects bubbling up right now. But I was happy to get a chance to talk with RP Eddy today. RP is an American businessman, author. He's a former U.S. government official, and he was also a United Nations senior diplomat. He's the CEO of Ergo, a strategy and geopolitical intelligence firm that is also behind the COVID-19 Intelligence Forum. His team has brought together a bunch of public health officials, epidemiologists, immunization experts, and other leaders in the field of health and public health specifically, including HR McMaster, Reince Priebus, and Richard Clarke. Now, the reason I know RP is because in 2017, he published a book with Richard Clarke, who is the former special advisor to the president for cybersecurity, and their book is Warnings: Finding Cassandras to Stop Catastrophes. I saw Richard speak on Bill Maher's show in 2017 and immediately bought the book. Now, the book is about Cassandras, which you'll hear RP explain it a little more in detail in a moment, what that actually represents. But they're people who are able to look at data, look at a lot of different fields going on, and make predictions. And their predictions often come out to be true. For example, he has a chapter on pandemics in his book. Now, it's well known that a lot of people have known that a pandemic was going to happen because they've been happening throughout human history. So it wasn't a surprise. But the accuracy with which they report on is pretty eye-opening here. Now, the funny story is a couple of weeks ago, I was just finishing a book on the opioid crisis, and I had warnings on my desk because that was what I was going to reread, specifically the chapter on pandemics, so that I could write an article about it for Big Think. And so it's right there on my desk, and I open up Twitter, and in my direct messages is RP Eddy sharing a PDF of his chapter on pandemics. He had come across my writing on Big Think and thought that I might be interested in it. So, coincidence? Yeah, pretty much, but it was pretty fortuitous, and I reached right back out to him, and so we finally got a chance to chat today, which was nice. Just to give you an idea of a little sample of their writing before we begin, this is from the chapter on pandemics. The Grim Reaper's favorite disguise is disease. Disease makes other disasters look trivial. More human lives have ended by bacteria and viruses than every other kind of catastrophe combined. Its constant presence masking its destruction. Yeah. And we talk about that during our conversation. How he has, he was in Idaho, so the connection cuts out a little bit sometimes, but it's mostly clear. But him and his family had drove from Connecticut to Idaho over the past week, and he was telling me that when he was going through New York and the East Coast, they had their masks on, and everyone, they've been through it. And as they got further into the country, there were less and fewer masks. And even he, who is working specifically on this, found that they stopped wearing their masks everywhere. And then they realized what they were doing. And it really just goes to show how no matter what you know about any topic, how easily influenced and swayed you are by your environment, by your surroundings and the people in it. And we do touch upon that specifically. There's one other point I want to bring up from his book that I think is very telling. It's this. In public health, you never get credit for correctly predicting an outbreak because implementing effective countermeasures blunts the impact of the disease, leading critics to believe that you exaggerated the threat. And this is what we're seeing right now all over, right here in Los Angeles, but more specifically Ventura County and Orange County. But because we haven't yet experienced the ravages of this virus, people are acting as if it doesn't exist. This is a topic we discuss often on Conspirituality. Now, to not be scared of a virus or to have conflicting opinions about the best way to go about it, whether or not a shutdown is appropriate, how you deal with going into businesses and restaurants and your feelings on that, those are all debatable points. But the idea that the virus is a conspiracy just goes to show how bifurcated we've become in our consumption of media and as well as our political awareness and how we relate to one another. As they point out in warnings, viruses have been killing humans for a very long time, and that will always continue. We're just trying to mitigate the harm right now. And by the looks of my immediate environment and the American environment, we're not doing too well at it. We talk about that a lot more in our conversation, so I'm going to let that go here, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with RP Eddy. I was recently stumbled across this quote by Hegel. We learn from history that we do not learn from history.
There you go.
So I'm wondering, having written Warnings with Richard Clarke, how does it feel to be a prophet?
First of all, that's one of my favorite quotes. And isn't it just genius how people come up with these simple, small words to really encapsulate things? And that's conceptually what I think Richard Clarke, Dick Clarke, and I hoped to have done with our book Warnings, is find something very obvious, sort of staring us in the face, and make it explicit, right? And in fact, others have called this the invisible obvious. It took, one great example is, there was, I think in the 70s, a conference on Wall Street about the role of women in Wall Street. And it was taken very seriously by all the banks, and they were going to have a conference to get together and figure out what the role of women is and what it ought to be and how they were going to promote it. And they had couple hundred participants and a lot of people on stage. They had 0 women on stage. And no one really noticed it until someone noticed it, then everyone noticed it. The invisible obvious. Steam boiling out of a kettle for hundreds of years until James Watson looked at it and said, that's power. There's power there. Steam engine. The invisible obvious. So one aspect of the invisible obvious are these people called Cassandras. And it goes back to Greek mythology. Cassandra was a mortal from Troy who refused to sleep with Zeus, maybe Apollo. I should know that. I think it was Apollo. And in punishment for her heresy, he struck her with the ability to foretell the future. Not so bad, right? But the curse that the future she would see would be of pending disasters, and that she could see these disasters, but no one would believe her. And she would go crazy in her prophecy. So this woman, this mortal Cassandra, lived in Troy. Remember the Trojan horse? So she was able to see that the Trojan horse was going to come and destroy Troy and burn her parents and her brothers alive. She saw this in these flaming visions. And she warned them, and they thought she was bonkers. They thought she was crazy, and they ridiculed her. And she had to then sit there and watch this happen. So it's the curse of knowing a disaster is coming, a curse of it being obvious to you but invisible to others. And that's what the Cassandra theory, that's what our book Warnings is about. And there have been many, many, many of these Cassandras. It takes a little while to describe the whole thing. I won't get further into it, but I'll add one last thing. It's not the person on the street corner wearing the sandwich board saying the sky is going to fall, the Chicken Little. It's the highly educated. It's basically the person in our society who we select, educate, train, and empower to warn us about the thing, and then we ignore the warning. So here we are living in one of the most warned potential catastrophes that I can think of. I'm not the only person to have given speeches about the coming pandemic. In fact, I'm one of the least most notable or credible people who have done so. Lori Garrett, in our book, I think she's chapter 11. Lori has won the Pulitzer, the Polk, and the Peabody as a scientific journalist. Those are the three awards everyone wants to get in journalism. She got all three of them. She's warned of a coming pandemic just like this one for decades. And we wrote about it in our book in 2017, and we said, here's what Lori is saying. Here's what the pandemic would look like. We get into the detail of, here's how the White House would need to respond. Here's what would have to happen societally. My firm then wrote an article about this for our clients in the end of February that said, here's what's going to happen to America. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's how infectious and deadly the disease will be. Here's how many people will die. That memo from February was exactly right. Here we are, what are we, June 20-something? But I'm a joke compared to what Lori and others, and Bill Gates, of course, gave a speech on epidemics, I think in 2015. So, where we are now is the most foreseeable catastrophe that I can think of. Climate change, people have the argument about, is that another one? But a little different. So I'm certainly not a prophet on this one. Lori Garrett and others experts are. In our book Warnings, we try to shed a light on those warners, those Cassandras, and most critically, how you and I and policy decision makers can find them and not ignore them, and the biases inherent in who we are that prevent us from seeing them when that bona fide credentialed expert comes to us and says, warning, 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 this is going to happen. And if you want to talk about some other examples, there's some great examples of other Cassandras who unfortunately were ignored and disaster struck, killing millions, costing billions, and leading a lot of heartache.
I do want to get into specific examples, especially around the pandemic and some of the others, but from a big picture perspective, when you talk about mythology, for example, you would probably be picking out patterns. I think of Hippocrates specifically. It's a little different with medicine, but his students would say, maybe the idea that all of these diseases are caused by gods isn't actually the case. Maybe there's something else going on, and it's because they were recognizing certain patterns that were happening. Now, what we have an advantage of right now in our modern era on the internet and connected is we have the world's history available at our fingertips, and yet we still don't seem to listen to Cassandras, and I wonder why you think that is.
Right. So if I could shorthand what you're saying, Derek, and I love it, you're saying, look, Hegel was right, saying the biggest lesson of history is we don't learn lessons from history, but he shouldn't be right anymore because the lessons are so available to us. Yet it still happens, right? Now, why? I don't think it has to do with the availability of the knowledge. I don't think it has to do with the message getting in front of you. I think it has to do with the warning getting into you. So, and we've all seen this in our lives many, many times. You have to learn the lesson to get the lesson. You have to be presented with the lesson in a way that gets to your limbic mind, your monkey brain. You have to be presented with something. All these, so for example, Mr. President, it's the end of January. There's a disease in China. It looks really nasty. We have enough data on it to say it's time for America to take dramatic action to protect our country from it. You got my attention. Tell me more about it, Mr. Fauci, for example. Well, I think we need to shut down airports, travel, spend billions of dollars buying PPE, and buy a bunch of events and stuff like that now. So you're saying I have to make a resource decision. I can spend the money and time on that, but I can't spend it, for example, building my wall in Mexico or whatever else it is that matters to me as the president at the moment. Yes, that's right. You have to make a hard decision right now in a zero-sum environment. Well, guess what? The warning you're bringing to me isn't compelling enough to me the way you brought it for me to believe you and take you seriously. Thereby, I'm ignoring the warning. It's not like, even in the instance with this president who's an idiot imbecile, and he is, it's not like it's not like it's an easy decision to make. It's not like, oh, sure, flip this switch, it's consequence-free. All these decisions they have a consequence. There's a cost to pay to listen to the warning in most instances. Sometimes the cost is ludicrously small. The Challenger explosion, I think, Derek, you and I look like we're a pretty similar generation. I was in 8th grade when the Challenger lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and 88 seconds into launch blew up and killed all the astronauts aboard, including a science teacher. Meaning all of us 8th graders in America were watching the launch because a science teacher was aboard, and most schools had a science teacher who applied to be an astronaut. We had one. Mr. Bogan thought he could have been the astronaut on board, and he wasn't. So we all watched that explode. The story, which is pretty well told but kind of forgotten now, is that the engineer who built the O-ring, the part of the Challenger that failed, from a company called Morton Thiokol, went to the NASA leadership and said, you cannot launch that rocket tomorrow or the day after because it's too cold. Very, very simple. My part, which I engineered, which I built on that rocket, tomorrow you are to launch, will fail. It will blow up. They will die. Who are you going to listen to? Pretty compelling, right? Like, is that the bona fide expert on the topic who you should listen to? I'd say so. So, if you came to me, Derek, and said, like, I'm going to tell you precisely what's going on with Big Think, like, I'd listen to you. You probably have some inside track on that. Well, they ignored this engineer. His name will come to me in a second. And of course, it blew up. So why? Because well, it turns out part of the why was the White House, Ronald Reagan, was set to do a speech that night from the Oval behind the Resolute desk as the Challenger launched, talking about America's place in the stars. And it was a big deal for the president, thereby a big deal for NASA, a big deal for everybody. And this, the schedule was set for tomorrow. The schedule was set for the president to do this. The pressure was on them to deliver what the president wanted. Now, if you'd asked the president, hey, there's a 10% chance this thing blows up, you still want to do it? He would have said, absolutely not. But nonetheless, they felt that pressure and they did it. And it's a great example of a perfect warning from a perfect warner being perfectly ignored. Because the person listening, it wasn't a costless decision. And he just made the wrong decision. Also because that engineer, when he was asked to present his argument, did it in a very lame, poorly displayed, low emotional quotient, low limbically activating way. He didn't get the message across in a way that the decision makers were motivated by it, right? So the second part of this whole story is, the warning is there by the qualified warner, and the list goes on, right? Like where we ignored the warning from the person we absolutely should have listened to. The decision maker makes the wrong decision. The crisis happens because the warner, so decision makers obviously make an error. They are being driven by biases to really get your answer, Derek. It's because they're being driven by biases and there's not enough inclusion in their thinking, right? That's ultimately what the decision maker is doing wrong, and it's not a cost-free decision. The warner isn't communicating properly. So the next book we should write should be about how do you get heard? How do you get your warning out so that the decision maker hears you? The short answer, the cheat sheet on that one is limbically activate them by telling him how they personally would pay a cost, tell a story, write a headline, say, Mr. President, you will lose the election. Mr. Head of NASA, you will lose your job. A police officer who's killing George Floyd, you're going to get charged with murder. Like, if you do this, you will be charged with murder. You will lose your wife in a divorce. You will be in jail with people you put in jail. Tell the story in a way that they hear it and get it. Maybe you'll influence their behaviors.
And that brings me to the next point. It's perfect parallel because I want to drill down. I was in 6th grade when the Challenger exploded. And yes, it's imprinted in my memory. We were watching it live.
Not full memory.
And you, in the book, you quote Stalin, which is the death of one man is a tragedy, the death of millions is a statistic. And around that same time, of that era, was the famine in Ethiopia. And what the charities did then, they took that same idea, and instead of saying 1 million people are dying of starvation, they showed you one child.
Oh.
And it was an extremely effective public health campaign, essentially. Now, you've addressed how you would talk to the president or people in the administration about this, but I'm sure you've realized or come across the numerous conspiracy theories that are going around right now. How do you actually break through to the public in a situation like we're in now with the pandemic to educate them on the dangers of thinking that wearing a mask is limiting your freedom and things of that nature?
First of all, you're using all my favorite quotes. I've been using that Stalin quote the last couple of days too. It's a great quote, right?
Yeah.
And exactly gets to this point about, limbically activating people. Yes. So right now, look, here's the dirty little truth about humans. Okay. Our brains are 130,000-year-old wet computers stuck between our ears. They are designed for a world much less complex than the one in which we find ourselves. And we are driven by biases and heuristics. We make mistakes, errors all the time because our brains have this hypermodal way, this way of moving much, much faster using heuristics, which are sort of shorthand shortcuts that worked really well 100,000 years ago. They don't really work well now in a very, very different environment. And biases, which actually served you 100,000 years ago, but now certainly don't serve you. So we have very, very flawed computers between our ears, part one, and we don't know that, okay? So one hope for humanity is we begin to understand our biases and heuristics. We begin to understand why we don't have bigger circles of empathy, why we don't love people who don't look like us as naturally as we should, etc. The second aspect of biases and heuristics is that we don't actually think for ourselves. So this is like the dirty secret, really, part two. 99+% of humans don't make up their own decisions. They make the decision to follow person X, Y, or Z. So if my rabbi, my priest, my union leader, my parent, my celebrity of choice, my sports team says do this, I do that. Because we are tribal animals, 99% of people make the decision to listen to that person's decision. So people I love and respect listen to Tucker Carlson and what he has to say, and that's the decision they have because they decide to take his decision. Alternatively, people I love and respect listen to Rachel Maddow, and people I love and respect read the Bible. Those are the decisions that they're going to take. 1% or less of people actually go through their own thoughtful process to make up their own ideas. In that world, that's a fact. It's not America, it's everywhere, okay? Now, first of all, I hope that wakes people up to, holy shit, is that right? Now, everyone who hears me say that is going to say, he's wrong, I make up my own decisions. No, you don't. When you last decided this political position, you did it because someone you respect told you that was the decision to have. Did you then explore the biases of that person? Did you then explore the policies behind that and how they impact you? Did you do your own reading? Did you do your own source material research? Did you write anything down about it? Did you learn from yourself, learn from your own cognitive process? Most likely you didn't. If you did, hallelujah. If you didn't, try it. So we don't actually make our own decisions. So what comes instead of making our own decisions? Conspiracies, myths, following other people. Those conspiracies and myths, up until 10 years ago, there was just misinformed people, right, who were just wrong and giving you wrong information. So call them benign and ignorant, as far as people who are wrong, right? And then there were profiteers trying to sell you something. You know, hey, I can cure that corona with my snake oil, $19.99, come buy it here, right? So there was profiteers, some degree of evil. And then there were downright evil people, you know, hey, come get in my van, I've got a puppy I want to show you. Like those are, disinformation, for evil purposes. We have to add to that now, through social media, this amplifying effect So our 130,000-year-old brains now are confronted with social media and the capacity for us to micro-media bubble. Go find precisely the view that feels most comfortable to me and comports with everything I believe, so I'm not challenged. If I'm a flat earther, I can find flat earth channels on YouTube. If I believe that Corona is a conspiracy to get Trump to lose against Biden, I can find people cogently making that argument, right? I don't have to ever make my own view up anymore. So the caveman looking at lightning in the sky saying, oh, the gods must be angry, is creating myth where there's uncertainty. We do the same thing now. So the final group that has entered this space is not just the confusion of social media, it's state actors spreading disinformation and conspiracy to divide us and change the way we live as a country. And look, we've had Senate committees say, bipartisan and Republican-led Senate committees say, the Russians penetrated our last presidential election with disinformation to try to drive the election one direction or another. I don't care where they tried to drive it. What I care is that we all fell victim to disinformation campaigns, conspiracy theories, and basically bullshit that was presented by a country that is our enemy in that venue, right? So that's happening now. Long answer, Derek. That's happening right now. A lot of conspiracy theories you see, a lot of videos you see of like the very concerned nurse who's crying and takes her mask off, from the middle of the nursing station and says, I don't know what's going on. It's this, I feel like we're putting African Americans in the gas chambers. We're killing all their, like some of the things you might see and you look at it and go, my God, that's so viscerally powerful. It really pulls me in. What's actually behind it? The Russians. Like Russians literally are taking our videos and reclipping them and cutting them. Russians are building videos and they're putting them in social media via bots. So are neo-Nazis in America. So are others. And then again, you get back to the spectrum of what existed before. Profiteers. Oh, let's not forget political divisiveness in an election year. So the spectrum of malactors who are creating conspiracy theory and myth, which we find very attractive in our monkey brains. Now you add social media plus foreign actors and you have a very, very dangerous stew. And if you want to talk more about particular conspiracy theories, I'm happy to do so.
Well, I have another podcast with two friends. We've all worked in, for lack of better terms, the wellness community for decades. And one thing we do on that podcast is point out how there's a whole number of wellness influencers who are saying talking points that we can directly trace back to OANN. But if you pointed that out, they would never admit that. But let's take one specific example, because it came up in your book where you write, a better public health surveillance and response system is the only way to protect against a man-made virus. Now, I completely agree with that. I mean, part of the reason we're in the mess we're in America is because we don't have a surveillance or contact tracing system. But if I were to post that, I know a number of people would say, oh, that's the way they're going to try to microchip us. And now, how would you respond to something like
that? I probably would just sigh and
well,
sad.
of course.
Derek, you've spent a lot more time doing this than I have, but I've tried to engage with some friends and friends of friends, family members, friends and friends of friends, through social media and other ways, saying, this conspiracy theory or that conspiracy theory is not actually fact-based. And living an evidence-based life is much more profitable in every way than a fable-based life. So let me try to explain to you the evidence versus the fable for the conspiracy theory at hand, right? Try to have that very rational conversation. I've had such marginal success moving people away from anti-vax perspectives or, whatever it is, 9/11 truthers. And that's, I was there when the second tower fell and killed one of my mentors, right? I was there when that happened, going down to see him. And so I find, I had worked on counter bin Laden work for years, and I find 9/11 truthers a very poignant and horrible type of truth, a type of bullshit, conspiracy theory. So my point is, I guess, and I mean it honestly, I think there's some people that I would just give up on. But what I would try to do is understand the base fear that's motivating him in that wrong direction. So the base fear in that instance might be, I don't trust my government. I believe my government is, it would be based in a don't tread on, they're all based in some healthy place. At least the thinker thinks so, right? We're all the heroes of our own novel. None of us are the black hats in our own story. So that person, I'm thinking of an individual in my life who I'm trying to, she's a friend of a friend and she's an anti-vaxxer. She's to the point where she's putting her kid's life at risk. You know, so to your story, this person is probably concerned about government surveillance, government freedom. It goes back to a don't tread on me mentality about rights in America. They looked at all the Edward Snowden stuff and they bought every aspect of that story. They look at the Patriot Act and like these are very complex, nuanced things, and they think America's after them, and they believe the next step is this microchipping thing, right? With black helicopters from the UN or whatever. And I would probably, if I had the time, I'd probably try to express to them that, you know, look, you're right in some areas. Here's what's correct. Here's what's been wrong about the U.S. government abrogation of our privacy rights. Here's what's happened. And here's what happened in response. Here's where our government system did the right thing or the wrong thing. Here's where a commission discovered it and revealed it, and it was put back and someone got in trouble. Maybe someone went to jail. Here's an example where, you know, like you're not wrong that we should watch. You're not wrong we should be aware. You're not wrong that that is a possible outcome. But you're wrong in thinking that we're falling for it right now. So, you know, and here's the evidence of where there's people as concerned as you are out there paying attention, our elected representatives and our journalists and others. And here's where, you know, they've stopped these initiatives in the way. But look, let me give you a much simpler answer. I don't believe in government conspiracy theories because I don't think government's that competent. 5 words, right? I don't remember that many that was. The U.S. government cannot keep big secrets. The U.S. government cannot pull off big conspiracies. How do I know? I had every security clearance anyone could ever want in the U.S. government. I mean, way above top secret. I saw everything. And that I, you know, you don't know what you don't know. But we do not have the capacity to pull off like 9/11 conspiracy, please, and keep it secret, nor would we want to. We don't have the capacity to microchip people, nor would we want to. And to keep it secret. So you know, I would remember the great incompetence and breadth of the U.S. government means everything leaks, particularly in this era. There are no big secrets, which is a problem in some instances. So that would be the first fire break that should make people comfortable.
That is pretty amazing. I'm interviewing Jeff Sharlet, the journalist, on Friday, and he wrote a piece about the cult of Trump in Vanity Fair recently. And he talks about like the QAnon sect of that's going for Trump, where they think that every misspelling that he has is a secret code. And the ways that people wrap their minds around to just try to fit into their pre-existing narrative is, you know, we can have a whole long conversation on that. But you do write about complexity a lot, especially toward the end of the book, and you bring it up here. And do you think it's even possible to teach complexity, or what you bring up too, which I love, which is orthogonal thinking? Like, is there a way to teach that in a society as fractured as ours?
You read it, man. I love it, Derek. Thank you. You really read the book, or at least you're an awesome skimmer.
No, I read it.
Thank you. I'm really proud of it, by the way. And it was such an honor to write it with Richard Clarke. And it's getting a lot of play now, as you can imagine. We have 3 big governments asking us to help them understand how to build warnings into their policymaking. 3 big respectable governments, not ours. Yeah, so, gosh. I am more interested in teaching empathy first and understanding your own biases, which is the same, 2 sides of the same coin. I think until we get out of our own way from a really deeply human monkey brain way, like we got to do that first. Then we can begin understanding complexity and orthogonal thinking, right? So, and you can't have orthogonal thinking unless you're an independent thinker. That's sort of what it means definitionally. You can't be an independent thinker until you understand your own biases and heuristics and that the monkey brain leads you in the wrong direction. And you can't do that until you really research those things, right? So if that makes any sense, let me make it a little more concrete. I have 3 little boys. And if I am parenting, if Kelly and I are parenting them properly, we're just teaching them to understand how to think for yourself, how to find your own data, but to do that, to realize your brain doesn't want to do that. Your brain takes the short route, which is to look for an alpha, look for a leader, look for something you believe in, and just Velcro to that. Just stick, put your nose in the tail of the horse in front of you and go. We literally have cells in our brain that we get from our herd background that make us comfortable doing just that. Get behind the leader you want, put your nose in their tail and follow them. And to learn about yourself and to learn that that's not the way you're going to be an efficient, safe, and happy human, that's the number one lesson we have to get to. And if you can get, and that again, it's uncomfortable. Your brain, the easy way downhill is just to follow. It takes mental toughness and to some degree grit to learn how to make your own path and to question things and to not just follow the herd. Like that lesson, as I say this, so Derek, I'm realizing that really is orthogonal thinking, right? That's thinking for yourself. Complexity is slightly different in my mind. And related in that, for example, one thing that we talk about a lot is our brains are simply designed to hide in the cave with the pointy spears pointed out at the coming saber-toothed tiger. Like that's what we are kind of optimized for. Huddle with a group. Fire behind us, spears in front of us, saber-toothed tiger outside, eyes on him, ready to spear that one tiger or 2 or 3 when they get closer. And in a sense of panic and heightened awareness inside together, right? We're good at that. When that saber-toothed tiger becomes the size of a baby saber-toothed tiger and goes 2, 4, 16, 32, 64, 128, 512, grows logarithmically, we have no capacity to understand what to do with that. We can't believe it. We don't know how to comprehend it. Our brain literally kind of freezes. And then we go into like an ostrich effect or denial. Because there's nothing in nature that prepares us for, and I'm obviously using the complexity of viral growth, right? We don't get what logarithmic exponential growth of a virus means. It's just nothing our brain's designed for. That's complexity. It's one example of complexity. There's so much complexity coming right now to humans about self-recursive or auto-generating things. Artificial intelligence, self-recursive artificial intelligence making itself smarter. Viral growth of viruses, growing in a way we just don't natively comprehend. Climate change, multi-system, multi-sectoral complexity. Those things are just hard. And part of what we need to learn before we learn them, before we become climate scientists with 20 years of PhD study or virologists with 30 years of field study, where we don't have to quite do that. We just have to know we can't do that. We just have to know we're bad at that. We just have to know we're in the stupid zone, as my friend Adam Robinson says, when those things are coming at us. It's not linear. It's not simple. We should recognize we're in the stupid zone and we're going to make mistakes. That's the first healthy step. And if you realize, man, I'm out of my depth here, you better go find an expert. And you better know how to find an expert. You better know that that expert is not the idiot on, sorry, wrong word. It's not the blowhard on Fox News or on MSNBC giving you their laden biased point of view. It's probably someone who, by the way, may not even have a good presentation skill, who has the real answers. You need to go find those people. But it's first the recognition that I am out of my depth and my brain isn't good at this. I need to go find someone who is good at it. That's the number one thing. Because complexity, we live in the era of accelerating history. This is the acceleration of history. And I could go on about that for a while. And if I haven't sent you my paper on it, Derek, I will. But we have more technological revolutions happening right now than we ever had. We always get one every 2 or 3 generations, right? We have, the Industrial Revolution, the Iron Revolution, blah, 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 the Tech Revolution. We now have the AI Revolution, the biotech revolution with CRISPR-Cas9 and other genetic modifications, and an energy climate revolution, all happening at once. They're all massively complex. So it's just a little too much for your basic liberal arts major to understand. And we better learn how to embrace work with, train, harness experts. And we can only do that from a position of humility and inclusion and as non-biased thinking as we can possibly muster. And that's the training that I want my kids to have.
Right. I love the chapters on the Internet of Everything and AI. I work in blockchain as well. And just having some experience in that industry and what's possible really opens your eyes to the inherent dangers that we look down the road at. And I think in general, we don't really understand. I mean, climate change is another example. But I wonder, speaking more specifically about what we can do, we've spent so much time, and I love how often you reference evolutionary biology, because that's kind of just a passion of mine to study that. But where we are right now looking at this, you write about the need for an economy of prevention, the need for a national warning office. You have your company's COVID-19 intelligence forum. You have all of these things that you're working on, or at least either realistically or ideologically, that you're trying to implement. And you do. I know you started off with a bit of humility, which I appreciate, but you have the ears of people and interface with people at a very high level. Do you have any confidence that America is going to course correct here and make some headway with the pandemic? And what does that look like? Or is it just going to be an administrative change that could hopefully do that?
Thank you. We have I'm very sorry to report, gives me no pleasure to say, that I have no optimism that this administration, this federal administration, is going to course correct in the face of this pandemic. And I think anyone who follows the news knows why, right? But let's just make it very explicit. We have a leader who has the capacity to stop this disease, who had the capacity to stop this disease in its tracks, who basically denies the disease is a problem, and denies and ridicules people who do the most simple and easy and generous thing one can do to prevent this disease, which is to wear a mask. He makes that an emasculating behavior. So no, this president is not going to course correct on that. Footnote, there is one scenario where he could, if he gets religion and realizes he is going to lose the election because the disease is ripping through the swing states, the purple states, and that polling continues to trend down for him there, and he wants to just try a Hail Mary something, and he forces the federal lockdown as a last gasp desperation act of selfish narcissism to try to win the election, but not actually based on his belief in the need to do so to save lives. That is a 5% possibility. And there's many other reasons I'm not confident that he can do it. One of the reasons is, and let's also be very explicit, for the industrialized nations, with one notable exception of Sweden, which is a pretty particular difference, America's performance on a per capita basis has been the worst. Brazil's catching up fast, and I'm not quite holding them in. Let's call it like the G7 most developed nations, right? So we have the worst response. We have the highest number of deaths per capita in this group I'm defining in my conversation here. And we also had weeks, if not a month, of warning ahead of other nations that did a lot better than us. Now, what's better mean? What cost are we paying? Oh, it's 120, 130,000 old people dying in old folks' homes. Woe is me, says a lot of people. Not me, but says others. Well, that's a big cost to those people and their families. And the 300,000 people that will be dead by the end of September, that's a big cost. But there's another humongous cost, the economic crisis that we're in. And the people who are dying, not from the disease, but the economic shutdown and the self-quarantines and all those. The people who aren't getting the necessary preventive medical care, the people who aren't going into a checkup, the children who are not being immunized, the folks who are at home with symptoms of a stroke and saying, I'm not going to go to the hospital. I'm not quite sure it's a stroke. I don't want to get corona in the hospital, so I'm going to stay here and die on my sofa. So in 2008, a number of people died from just the economic downturn, deaths of despair, deaths of not getting preventative care, etc. The Lancet did a study on what happens with economic downturn in '08. We're going to have another study probably 2-3 years after this that's going to say, wow, tons of people died also because of the concomitant illnesses or concomitant challenges of the shutdown. So there's an economic cost, there's a human cost, there's a disease cost. They're all real. And there's another cost, which happens to be U.S. preeminence and predominance and prestige has been absolutely vomited on. The European Union is not letting travelers from America into the EU because we have done such a shitty job preventing this disease from spreading. Wow, you should be embarrassed. So is this president going to fix it? No. Only way he would is that small scenario I presented for you. You asked another question, I think. But.
Well, I mean, you're working. Let's take the intelligence forum you're working on. I mean, what kind of solutions do exist, or what can people do, or maybe local governments do, that since we're not getting leadership?
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for leading us to the light out of the darkness there. So I got to say this. I'm so proud of my team at Ergo. We built, we found a bunch of the world's leading vaccinologists, epidemiologists, and public health experts, many of whom I've worked with historically in my time in government, where I helped design the first public health strategy from the White House level when Ebola broke out in Zaire in the 90s. So I had the privilege of having this connectivity to these public health admirals, to these great experts, and we brought them together very quickly into this Corona Intelligence Forum. And then my group of analysts at Ergo, none of whom have that background, learned really, really fast how to work with those experts and built an epidemiological curve, for example, that's been the most accurate in America. And that's bad news, right? A small company like mine should not have the most accurate epidemiological curve in America. That should be owned by the White House and CDC. But in fact, the curve that the White House has been using has persistently been, obviously, more optimistic than ours and inaccurate. The one that I'm not going to mention the group, they're well-intentioned, smart people, but they've been wrong, we've been right. I have insight into the CDC's own models. They're getting better, also haven't been as good as ours. So right now, I'm just giving a shout out to the folks on my team who built that. They know who they are. That's been really helpful to our clients to understand where this thing is going. That's the skeleton of understanding the future of the disease, is understanding the epidemiological predictions. Here's the good news. Trump, for whatever reason, and I think it was for malignant reasons, said, hey, guess what? All of a sudden I embrace federalism, and it's up to all the governors to deal with this. So you have some governors, like Ned Lamont of Connecticut, who has done a fantastic job on this disease. So now New York did not do a great job. Governor Cuomo has been a fantastic communicator, and he's done a really good job advocating for states against the White House. So as much as President Trump says, hey, I'm a federalist, it's up to all the governors, he and his son-in-law also work states each other to get the supplies. He was paying both sides of the equation. Absurd, right? And he was giving out medical supplies to states who were red states, Republican states, ahead of blue states who needed them. I mean, repulsive, right? So, hey, I'm a federalist, it's up to you. And by the way, I'm going to keep the federal toys for myself, and I'm going to give them to my friends. What? All right. So some governors did a great job. Ned Lamont, excellent job. Full disclosure, he's a friend. Great job. And the statistics bear it out. Connecticut has the lowest RT, that's the transmission factor at a moment of time. So R naught is how much the disease transmits from person to person. RT is what the T is, right now, how well is the disease transmitting in your state. Connecticut's had the lowest RT running for a number of weeks because of the policies we put in place. So governors can lead, and some are. CEOs can lead. My friend Graham Allen runs a company called Sloan Valve, great union manufacturer. Graham, Jim, and Kirk actually all run it. And it's out of Illinois, and they employ thousands of workers in tight, confined spaces. They took a very preventative series of steps to protect their workforce. By the way, they've now taken a series of preventative steps to protect their workforce from police misbehaviors, different conversation. But they have led. I would encourage you to look at, there's a Vimeo from Graham Allen of Sloan Valve, where he addresses his employees, and he says, I've written letters to the police department chiefs, the police chiefs, and the mayors of all the towns where we have factories. And I've said, I don't want one of my employees under a police officer's knee from Stone Valve. What are you doing to reassess how you're doing this? And I'm, as a major taxpayer, I want you to be accountable to me as police departments and CDCs and presidents need to be to their citizens. So CEOs can take leadership. Derek, you can take leadership. I can take leadership as a father and as an individual. So we've just driven across the country from Connecticut to Idaho in a Suburban with 3 little boys. And we've stopped at every state on the way. And I've watched in New York, the New York area, the previous epicenter of the disease, everybody wears a mask for obvious reasons. They are limbically activated, they get it. Like, they see it, they don't want to get it, they've seen people die, right? We have refrigerated morgues in the streets of New York City. I'm not playing anymore what we did. We get it, it's real. Then you get to Wisconsin and I go to my first public venture, my first public outing. I got a mask on, I walk into a bar I can't miss when I'm in this town. I gotta go to this bar, I love this bar. And I walk in and there's the bartender we know and love, and she knows who I am, and she goes, come on, RP, this is a fraud to get Trump out of office, isn't it? Now, is she crazy? No. There's been 260, at that point, 260 deaths in Wisconsin. I think that was the number, something like that, some very small number. There are blocks in the Bronx, a block in the Bronx where more people have died than 2 weeks ago, 15 states in America combined. There's no shared consequence in Wisconsin, Idaho, West Virginia. These states they haven't seen it. And of those small number of people who died, as you know, Derek, 40% or more died in old folks' homes, and we're quite old. There is clearly a callousness amongst Americans, if not humans, about old people dying. I don't think there should be, but there is. But they died silently and alone. HIPAA regulations mean that we have to keep it very private, what's going on. Safety regulations mean the family's not in there watching them, which is a crisis on its own, people dying alone. I find that so sad. Obviously, there's no photos or videos of it. So those people are dying, but you don't see them. So there you are in Wisconsin, and there's this woman who's got a heart full of love, and she says, RP, tell me, isn't this a hoax? Because she doesn't see it. And she can't believe the media anymore. Can she believe CNN, MSNBC, or Fox? No, she cannot. Because they're all clickbait media. They all get paid by making you afraid. They all get paid by being the micromedia bubbler that draws you in. So she doesn't know what to believe. There's nothing wrong with her. There's nothing crazy with her asking that question. In fact, I appreciate she was honest about asking. She's incorrect. That's only gotten stronger as I moved through the West. Now I'm in Idaho, close to Seattle. People believe a little bit more because it's been here. So here's the thing. Almost done, Derek. The Eddy family, we kind of fell for it too. We wore less masks as we got further into the country. I rationalized that as, well, there's less endemic disease. That was a mistake. We don't have it, thank God. But we are now putting the mask back on when we go outside. We are social distancing. We are washing our hands, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to. It's very easy. Even someone, I talk about this disease every day, all day. I've worked on diseases since 1996. For me, it's really easy when my kids say, come on, Dad, can we please jump in the pool? Please, it's a hot day. And I look at the pool, and there's 30 people in a pool that should probably even safely have 15, minus the disease. It's already overcrowded. And these hot kids sitting there, and they're, please, please, please. I so badly want to say yes, and I have to say no. We want to give in. We want to take the low road, not the low road, the easy road out. Final point, Derek. The reason we do that is we forget what risk means. Yeah. Okay, risk is consequence times likelihood. It's not just likelihood, it's consequence. So if my little boy gets in that pool and he gets a disease, he's probably okay. I may not. I have comorbidities. I have a higher number. My dad, who I want to see sometime soon, has a really high potential fatality rate. And as do other old folks we might run into. So it's really easy to look at the low likelihood and to ignore the high consequence. Sorry, that was a lot. Thank you for listening.
Oh, of course. Of course. No, I understand. I drove out to Vegas last weekend to see my father. I got tested and then we, felt it was okay. But it's, unfortunately my parents watch, my father, and they're separated, but they watch Fox and that's where they get their information. And it's a hard situation. I always like to try to end on a good note, but it's tough on these talks, but they're real conversations and they're important for people to understand. But I do know you have the intelligence forum you've been working on. I wonder if there's another book in the works, or if you're setting your sight on something else besides all this work on the pandemic that you're doing right now.
Our intelligence forum at Ergo is great. We have a number of terrific clients, name brands, countries, states, and I'm so proud of the work we've done to help them see around corners. Like, where's the disease going? What's the new thing in vaccines? What's going on with therapeutics? Is it a big deal that dexamethasone works? What's the deal about hydroxychloroquine? Because we can find this great group of experts, we could create transparency where there was opacity and help them understand this. And we had a client say to us really early, I think you helped me save lives at my firm. Wow, holy Moses. A for-profit business, if I can have someone say that to me, what a pleasure. In government, you might believe those things, you might hear those things, but in for-profit business, you don't get that a lot. So unless you're in healthcare, I guess. So that was really lovely. In the works, I want to do a book on what I described, which is, so you think you've got a warning, how do you get it heard? And then part 2 of that book, or the other aspect of that, has to be, how do you listen more appropriately? So that has to be about inclusion and bias. No, not in the works right now. We have something in the works right now for a narrative television series about Cassandras. And I won't say more of it than that, because as you know, with Hollywood, you can get really, really excited with really, really big names. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't come to pass. So I'm telling myself that, and I understand that we are very privileged to be working with some of the best and the brightest and the most ethical people in Hollywood on something that I'm really excited about, but I got no more to announce on that. And then on warnings, I want the Biden White House to create a national office of warning that reports to the president and sits in the White House complex. I want a small group, very small, maybe 6 to 10 people, drawn from the different agencies to come together, and I want them to scan the world for threats. And I want them to use a refutable, auditable process to see if they are right or wrong with their warnings. I want them to be trained in biases. I want them to understand that when the person who comes in with a warning, if they have dandruff and bad breath and poor presentation skills, doesn't mean they're wrong. And I want them to know that if a Harry Marco Polis shows up and says Madoff is a fraud, but he curses at you the whole time at the SEC while it's happening because you're just a fucking idiot and you don't get it, Harry Marco Polis still might be right. And of course he was. I want that office to be trained in those things. I want them to know these things. I want them to be auditable. And I want them to look for warnings we're missing otherwise. We do not have that function in government. If we did, I guarantee you we would have done a better job on this disease. Now, with the president, we have, perhaps not. But we don't have that function. We used to have that function. There used to be a National Intelligence Officer for Warning inside the National Intelligence Council, which is a superstructure that kind of sits above CIA. And it's supposed to be the clearinghouse of all government intelligence on certain topics. And we had one senior official whose job it was to warn us on things that were falling through the cracks. His last warning was, hey, this guy Saddam Hussein might invade this country called Kuwait. We better pay attention. DOD says no. CIA says no. State Department says no. Everybody says, Charlie Allen, you're crazy. Charlie Allen's a Cassandra. He makes his warning. I'm telling you, Saddam Hussein is going to invade Kuwait. It's going to be a huge shit show. No one listens to Charlie Allen. He puts a memo on President Bush 41's desk saying this is going to happen. Charlie Allen ends up getting demoted and fired for doing that. Charlie Allen, of course, is entirely correct. What if that warning had been heard? Why don't we have that function in government? I want to build that. I have some old friends in the Biden campaign. I'm trying to reach them. If anyone hears that, I want to talk to them about it. We've done a lot of writing on it. And as I mentioned, 3 governments right now are asking us for their help, our help on how to do something like that. So I need to find some time to work on that. So that's something I'm also excited about. There's a really excellent nonprofit that's come to us as well that might support that initiative to put together a round table of really thoughtful people on what would that look like. Is it an office in the White House? What's it mean to be self-auditable or auditable? Like, how would this thing work? I don't want to create the DHS. I want to create something super efficient, super smart, super aware of our biases, heuristics and able to warn us about things we're ignoring. So that's what's underway now, Garrett.